Hi everyone, and welcome. Today we're going to be talking about a Legion strategy in the Dunes map that has a side focus on efficiently cramming more rare monsters into our maps. This is done both to try and find god-touched monsters and also because I'm running the jewel called Inspired Learning, which allows me, when I kill a rare monster, to steal one of its modifiers for 20 seconds, and you're allowed to have as many at once as you can manage to kill. Legion in particular adds a ton of juicy rares to the map, so it is a great starting point for that jewel. Now, Legion is a viable strategy all throughout the league because 5-way Legion carries remain the most efficient way to level, and people are going to be paying for those carries up until the closing hours of the league, just trying to reach level 100. The carrying player needs an unending stack of those Legion emblems, and we can provide them. For those who might be less familiar, Legion is the content you access by clicking a large purple obelisk you might find sitting around in your maps, causing a frozen golden army to appear around you. You break these warriors out of stasis by killing their frozen forms, then, when the short timer runs out, any that you killed will appear to be killed again, the more the better. This is best accomplished with a fast build or one that has amazing proliferation, like explosions or chaining, and ideally all of the above. Mine, for instance, is a very fast Lightning Strike Raider that uses Herald of Ice to assist with proliferation, and I always get 95 to 100% of the Legion broken out this way. As mentioned, we want to add as many rare monsters as we can, not only because it increases the likelihood of getting a god-touched rare modifier and potentially a lot of currency, but also stealing their mods just makes mapping a lot smoother and safer. But we don't want to break the bank or double our time in these maps trying to add these rare monsters, so on top of Legion, I chose relatively cheap and easily accessed methods. Things like Essence, Bestiary, Altars, and Strongboxes. I also used a random Sextant just that added more rares to the map. So this way, everything that we're adding appears directly in the map or with the click of a button. There's no need to travel to separate areas. And aside from that one random Sextant to add rares to the map, the other 3 Sextants I used were Legion, additional Strongboxes, and Strongbox Quantity / Enraged. Now, let's take a look at our Atlas tree, and there's really not any surprises here. We invest points into the mechanics that I mentioned above, so we've got points into Legion, Strongboxes, Essences, Altars, and Bestiary. We also blocked most of the mechanics we didn't want to see, although I let Harvest, Heist, and Expedition spawn. The other notable elements are that we take Singular Focus for map sustain, and we are only taking one of the 2 Eldritch Altar keystones. We take Gaze into the Abyss, but not Wrath of the Cosmos. Remember, even though they live on opposite sides of the tree in the red and blue areas, these keystones actually apply to both kinds of altars, so you could, in theory, take both, or like I did, take the one in the opposite colored area from the one you are running. To briefly cover the amount I invested into this experiment, I set out to do 24 maps or 1 full Eldritch cycle for this test. For each map, we needed a Polished Bestiary Scarab for 1 Chaos, a Rusted Ambush Scarab, which were 2 Chaos at the time of purchase, Gilded Legion Scarabs, which were bought at approximately 7 Chaos each. I bought 25 of them for a Divine, a Rusted Elder Scarab at 1 Chaos, a Dunes map, which I needed to subtract from our profit at a rate of 3.5 Chaos per map, since we did self-sustain. And then I paid 6 Chaos for the Legion craft on the map device, rounding out with 1 use of each Sextant per map, keeping in mind that Sextants have 4 uses. We do actually have to take a brief detour here on Sextants before we finalize that investment calculation. If you were only going for the Legion Sextants and none of the other ones that I was using, you could probably just buy them for 35 to 40 Chaos each, which ends up being 9 or 10 Chaos per added Legion. It's a little on the expensive side, but it's fast and it's efficient. For this experiment, I actually did it a little differently. I rolled my Sextants myself, looking for the Legion and other 2 Strongbox Sextants that I mentioned, setting aside any other good rolls as compasses for sale. As it turns out, I wound up with a pretty massive profit for only around 20 or 30 minutes of rolling Sextants. I admittedly got a bit lucky, I'm going to show you the data here. This luck showed itself primarily in rolling a higher than average number of Conqueror and Sacred Grove Sextants. Those were the primary drivers of the nearly 4 divines worth of profit from the Sextant rolling process, and that is 4 divines over and above what I spent on the Sextants in the first place, so pretty massive. Most of those have already sold at this point, but even assuming that we just rolled 1 of each of those expensive modifiers, not 3 and 5 respectively, even with just 1 of each, we still would have broken even or made a little bit of profit doing the Sextants ourselves, rather than paying 35 to 40 chaos each for the Legion Sextants. So take that for what you will. Those of you who find selling compasses tedious and may wish to just buy the Legion compasses and be done with it, that's totally reasonable, and I respect that. As for me, I got moderately lucky here, and I was able to sell my spare compasses for quite a lot. With that said, I did not figure those sales into the final profit calculations for this experiment. All I did was I refrained from considering Sextants an added cost the way I did it. So with that detour over, setting aside the Sextants, since we made money on that part of the process, our costs sit around 20 chaos per map, or 492 chaos split among maps, the map device mod, and scarabs. Now, let's actually talk about running the strategy. It's pretty straightforward. I dash through most packs along the edge of my map with phasing. I maybe stop briefly to kill a few to build up Vol souls for Vol Lightning Strike. Then I go to the back of the map and find the boss and kill him. Do remember that doing this quickly takes the boss options out of the equation for all future altars you might find, and the boss options on the altars are generally the least exciting. From there, I work my way back to the front of the map, killing everything I find along the way, but not stopping to loot unless it's like a divine level drop, something like that. One of the main reasons I do this is to keep my inspired learning buff up at all times, since each buff only lasts 20 seconds. Once I've cleared the map to under 20 monsters, I will work my way back up the opposite way one last time, looting, and this is aided actually by my Feral's Fur armor. Feral's Fur lets me keep my frenzy charges up at all times, and my build relies on frenzy charges for movement speed, so this feels very, very smooth while looting. I really disliked running a raider build in the past where I'd have to loot a map and my frenzy charges would fall off, felt very clunky. This is smooth as butter. So this whole process from beginning to end per map would end up taking around 10 minutes on average. It could go as low as 8 or 9 if I didn't hit any lengthy mechanics, and it could go as long as 13 or 14 if I hit like Harvest, Expedition, some tough monsters, that type of thing. Now, as we discuss the outcomes and take a look at the data, I want to draw your attention to something. A lot of this data is what we might call low variance. In other words, you can generally expect to get some very similar results per map. It's not going to be too much higher or lower. These are things like Essence, Bubblegum Currency, Incubators, Stack Decks, Eldritch Currency, Harvest Juice, stuff like that. If you just do a 20 map experiment over and over and over again, you're going to come out about the same on these low variance items every time. That's not to say that they're low profit, just low variance. You're going to get about the same values every time. Then, after that, we've got what you might call high variance but low impact drops. These are things like random divine drops, the random influenced maps that you might get from the boss. So these are things that are going to happen pretty infrequently and unpredictably. And while they're a nice little bonus, they're not often enough to make a huge difference. Not often enough and not quite expensive enough to make a huge difference. The presence or absence of them isn't going to make or break the strategy, in other words. They might wind up being the difference of a half a divine one way or the other, half a divine per hour. So again, they're nice, they're a bonus, but they're not going to make you feel terrible if you don't get them. Then, here comes the important part. There are 3 or 4 real high variance and high impact things to keep your eyes on. And these things are the reason it's best to do this strategy for kind of a while. I did a couple dozen maps, and that's kind of the baseline minimum that I would suggest doing. This is just to balance out the dry streaks that you're going to encounter on these high variance, high impact variables. The first up is, of course, the sextant rolling process, which I already mentioned. It happens before you even get started. And in high enough volume, this is always going to work out as a profit. In my case, it was a fairly massive profit, given the low time investment. But this process does have the definite possibility of low rolling if you're only doing 50 or 100 rolls. You might find way too long, or it might take you way too long to get your Legion Sextants, or you might just not get good sellable ones to recoup your costs. So worth keeping in mind. Next up is Bestiary. There are really only a couple of notable beasts that you're hunting for out there, and they're rare. Pheneumal-plagued Arachnid, the Split Beast, and Crichic Chimero, the Imprint Beast. If you go for a long time with none of those, you're basically only going to break even on your bestiary investment. You can sell your yellow beasts to recoup the costs of the scarab, so you will break even. You do profit about a half a chaos per yellow beast when you sell them in bulk, but you're not going to really profit unless you get some of those big boy drops. The next one is arguably the most important for this strategy, your Mariketh emblems. These are a major profit driver because they complete the set of 5, but they're hard to come by, even with the Atlas passives that increase the odds of finding them. Because first you've got to get the good RNG of having a Mariketh Legion spawn in the first place, and they are the rarest. And then next you've got to roll your 1% chance per splinter for it to become an emblem. To have any chance of keeping up with even a fraction of the Eternal Empire and Vol emblems that are going to be pouring in like a waterfall. Mariketh emblems are almost always going to be your limiting factor in being able to sell these emblems in bulk sets. The other 4 emblems combined, mind you, are currently going for around 20 chaos, whereas a full set of 5 sold in bulk is going for around half a divine, or 87 chaos. That means that every time a Mariketh emblem drops out in the wild, you basically just made 67 chaos. You could buy individual Mariketh emblems after the fact, when you're done farming, to increase the total number of sets that you can sell in bulk, and you will still make a profit that way. But instead of half a divine for this set, you're only going to be profiting around 30 chaos because you have to take out the cost of paying for the Mariketh emblem. So obviously not ideal. You want to find those out in the wild. The last and most controversial of the high variance, high impact rolls are God-touched rares. So if you get a rare monster with exactly the right combination of mods, it could drop multiple divines, or even more if you call in a magic find color from the Forbidden Trove Discord channel, or your friends list if you're lucky. So with all that said, how were my rolls on these various factors? What were my results? Here's the profit breakdown. Overall, I profited 4.2 divines an hour after subtracting investments. You can round that down to 4 in case you're unlucky or there are things in my stash that won't end up selling. Remember, for the investment costs, I did not count the sextant rolls as either a positive or a negative. This 24 maps for 4.2 divines an hour took me around 4 hours of sustained play at around 10 or 11 minutes per map, and that does count any time that I was in hideout, including stash and trades. I stopped the counter anytime I had to turn the game off for longer than 5 minutes, or if something went wrong with the recording specifically, not something that would happen to a normal player running maps. But other than that, I was running the timer. So if we take a look at the profit breakdown here, we can see what the major profit drivers were. How were my rolls on these high variance, high impact subjects? Well, you already saw that my sextant results were strong, but those aren't being included in the profit calculation. You might just opt to purchase those. Next up, on Mariketh emblems, I was fairly middle of the road, maybe, a little below average. I was able to assemble 7 full sets without purchasing Mariketh emblems, and to maximize profit, I would purchase 3 more Mariketh emblems to at least get it up to the number of Templar emblems that I have, to match those and then sell that number of sets of 5 emblems in bulk. The remaining random emblems of the other 3 types could be sold for a couple chaos a piece maybe, or maybe just run them yourself if you like Legion. Now, as anticipated, and as you should anticipate too, I went long dry streaks with no Mariketh emblems, and in many cases no Mariketh Legion spawn at all. But also once I got 2 emblems in a single map, it's very streaky. And after some experimentation, I think you are mathematically better off not taking the Templar increased chance node in the passive tree. I think having such a high chance of spawning Templar ends up cannibalizing too many of your Mariketh spawn chances. And if given the choice between the two, you would way rather have to purchase Templar emblems to complete a set than purchase Mariketh emblems for obvious reasons. That is a problem you're very unlikely to have, but you'd be happy to see it if you did have it in that unlikely chance. Next up, beasts were also middle of the road and also kind of streaky, as you might expect from a strategy like this. With the Scarab and the Atlas passives, we were getting maybe 2 or 3 red beasts per map, sometimes more. And from all that, we wound up finding 0 Krakic Chimeras, which would have sold for 100 chaos apiece. That's the most expensive beast out there. We did, however, on the other hand, find 4 Phenomenal Plagued Arachnids, which will sell for 45 to 50 chaos apiece. Or they would sell if I was planning on doing that. In fact, they're going to end up making my life easier instead, because I need to buy a bunch of Phenomenal Plagued Arachnids to split logbooks for an upcoming strategy. But the profit could have been 45 to 50 chaos each. For me, it'll just be a cost that I don't have to pay later. So the 4 Phenomenal certainly more than made up for the monetary investment of the Scarabs, and I'd tentatively say, in my opinion, it was even worth the tree point investment too, but I think I might also want to take the nodes at the bottom left of the Atlas passive tree, the ones that help you spawn more beasts as well. I think those might round out the strategy. Final high variance topic, God Touch rares. They were a bust for me for this particular set of maps. You wouldn't necessarily expect to find one in such a small sample size. As near as I could tell, I only hit one that had anything close to the right mod combination, and it just dropped a medium-sized stack of chaos that I could have gotten from a couple Legion chests. Neither of the 2 divine drops that I got during this experiment came from a God-touched rare. One came just from naturally spawning from a random monster, and one came from a Legion chest. Moving on to the lower variance parts of the strategy, the parts you'd expect to be consistent, the altars were an easy win, profiting a couple hundred chaos in embers alone, for free, by the way, and then plus all the maps, the map currencies, and the scarabs that came from them as well. There is a reason that altars are suggested as an adjunct to nearly every strategy out there. It's because they work. Next up, the essences were a bit disappointing relative to the amount of point investment in the tree that I used, and I think probably this was due to the lack of the map device mod being used. You know, that's really a powerhouse, adding a couple of essences there practically for free at 2 chaos. You know, the essences, even in this strategy, they still accounted for over 100 chaos of our profit, but keep in mind, 100 chaos spread among 16 divines, and it was an Atlas point investment of 16 Atlas points. That's not nothing. That's 8 or 10% of your Atlas points right there. I've got to think carefully about whether that is worthwhile, about whether there's a different way to approach that. And then meanwhile, I really wasn't loving the strong boxes relative to the investment, even more so than the essences. I particularly didn't love the upper right-hand nodes that add divination and scarab rewards to some strong boxes. The majority of the profit here seemed to come from the occasional operatives strongbox hit with scarabs, and honestly, this league scarabs are fairly cheap, so I didn't hit any home runs there. They didn't account for a huge amount of profit. Maybe I was just discounting how many drops came from strong boxes in general. Maybe others were having better luck than me, but I did try to keep my eyes open, and I wasn't seeing much to justify the expense, the added hassle of more sextants to manage, and all the tree points that I spent on this. I mean, honestly, the enraged strongbox sextant alone, I could have sold for 70 chaos each rather than using one of them every 4 maps. I rolled a ton of those. That could have been even more on top of my massive profit from rolling sextants, but instead I used them, and I'm not sure how much I got for doing so. There's also the fact that even rusted ambush scarabs right now have shot up in price since I bought them. They now cost 4 or 5 chaos each if you want to buy at least 10 at a time, which, to prevent things from being too tedious, you really do want to buy at least 10 at a time. And so all that makes me think that for a more laid back and potentially more profitable strategy, just take the last bestiary nodes over down at the bottom left here, and maybe some other random thing like delirium or heist. Even expedition. Despite slowing the map down a bit, it is very profitable, and it contains guaranteed rare monsters. Harvest is probably a bit slow for this strategy, but it's not bad if you like it. I certainly ran it when I came across it. You could make it a more central theme of the strategy if you didn't mind adding an extra minute or two to your maps. Also, if you don't mind sextant management, you could opt to replace the 2 strongbox scarabs and all the tree points with 1 gilded gilded scarab sextant, the one that says the first 3 possessed monsters that you encounter drop a gilded scarab, and then replace the strongbox tree nodes with the atlas nodes Seance, Royal Guard, and Exiled Will. And the 3 of those together basically mean that you will every single time find 3 possessed monsters, and therefore 3 gilded scarabs. In fact, I kind of like that idea. That is a medium maintenance setup, and it is very low maintenance in your map. You just kill the monsters and pick up the gilded scarabs. So I'm pocketing that one away for the future. The other change that I think I would make is, for this run, I only took 1 of the 2 altar keystones, and I would consider taking both in the future. I took Eldritch Gaze, but not Wrath of the Cosmos. And this is because I was at least vaguely trying to gain experience through this process, leveling from 97 to 98, and even a single map with Wrath of the Cosmos was very dicey. But with that said, if you don't mind dying occasionally, it doesn't add a ton of time to your map if you're build is fast, or if you use Cast on Death Portal, and if you don't mind dying occasionally, you're going to profit a lot more if you take both of these. And so the only reason I didn't take it is because I was trying to level. So I think I might, for the future, get myself to a low, get to the next level, stay at a low experience point, and just take Wrath of the Cosmos and accept the death every now and again. I think that wraps it up. So would I recommend the strategy? Yep. Definitely. Tweak it to your liking with some of the suggestions I made above, but the general package of Legion in Dunes is very strong if your build can reliably break them out. I personally am still looking for the strategy that it will reliably break 5 Divines an hour from my build and my playstyle, but in the meantime, this one is plenty respectable and I can recommend it. So thanks for tuning in, everybody, and take it easy.